everyone. So glad to see all of you here. My name is Steve Haruch, and I've been invited to just tell a little bit about my story. I would start that by saying that, just seeing all of your faces here, that this is the kind of group and the kind of community that it took me a long time to find anything like this. So the fact that you're all here, the fact that you're all paying attention, the fact that you're all in community together is really inspiring to me. My personal story, I think, is going to sound familiar to a lot of people. And it's not very often that I'm in a room where that's the case. But I was born in Seoul, South Korea, we think. That's what it says on some documents. I don't actually know how old I am. I know how old I feel, especially after trying to play basketball today. But so I came to the United States in 1976. I was adopted by a white family just outside of Chicago. Although I will say, when I say white family, I grew up around people who still felt a real connection to their European roots. I grew up around Czechs who also refer to themselves as Bohemians. And if you really get to know them, we'll call themselves Bohunks. That's kind of a slang term among Czechs for themselves. It was just me and my sister in the family who were Korean. We're not biologically related. But I think a lot of you will sort of recognize this part of the story, which is that we just sort of we just grew up thinking of ourselves as kids, and just did the things that kids do. We thought of our parents as our parents, and that was very. It seemed very simple for a long time. I guess it seemed simple until it was no longer simple. For me, it really happened in middle school. So let me just back up. I'm saying middle school. I didn't actually know what the term middle school meant until a few years ago. The school that I went to was kindergarten through 8th grade. So, most of my classmates were people that I had known basically my entire life. And somewhere around 6th and 7th grade, the physical difference between us became something that people could not ignore anymore. I really became the target for harassment, violence, really, really horrible, remarks from, people that I'd known all my life. And that was a very difficult time. I'm really aging myself here by saying this, but the real inspiration was there was a movie that came out that was called 16 Candles, that some of you may know. And there was a very unfortunate Asian character in that movie. And I was called by his name and teased horribly, relentlessly every day. And so that was, that was a very difficult time for me. And it was really kind of the beginning of like what felt like a real splintering of my sense of myself. The context of that time, and I'm sure many of you are aware of this, is that, in the 70s and 80s, a lot of adoptive parents, what they had been told by social workers or by the adoption agency or by whomever, was that the best remedy or the best environment in which to raise their children was a colorblind or a race-blind environment, in which really the thing that you told your kids was that these things don't matter. Like, just ignore them. If people make fun of you, just ignore them. They're wrong, and everybody's the same. Obviously, we're all human beings, and that on a very deep level, that is true. But as a strategy for trying to get through life, it's not a great one, because racism and ideas about race exist. And we live in a world where those ideas are powerful, and they have historical roots, and they can only be understood by looking at them, by confronting them. But my parents, and I don't blame them for this, they weren't really prepared for that. They hadn't been prepared for it. And they sort of they felt like their love was enough. And of course, at the end of the day, it is. But I can't really overstate what a difficult period that was for me as a person, just wondering where I fit, if I fit anywhere at all. If I didn't even belong in the town I grew up in, where would I belong, right? Flash forward a little bit from that. I sort of, the 90s was a very interesting time for Asian American art. There was kind of a resurgence of Asian American art. There had been a big movement in the 60s. We won't talk about the 60s. Hopefully everyone will, if they haven't already, will watch the Asian Americans series on PBS. I think it's still streaming for the rest of this month. I actually have some friends who worked on that project. It's really a fantastic way to sort of get a big picture look at why we even use the term Asian American when it encompasses a lot of groups that may not seem to have that much in common. But it was born of political struggle. It was born in solidarity with Black Americans. Anyway, so there was some cool things happening in Asian American art in the 90s, and so I sort of gravitated toward that. I found Asian American writers who were talking about their identities, and in many ways, this was what first made me feel like I had permission to talk about my experience, honestly, because really what I had been encouraged up to that point was to basically deny that these things were happening, to really to feel like I had to prioritize peace. I had to prioritize other people's perceptions over my own. And so that was my sort of gateway into thinking about my own identity in a critical and honest way. The poet Liang Li was very important to me. I won't go on listing writers, although I'm happy to talk about in the breakout if you'd like. I'm not going to tell you my entire life story, I promise. We're going to fast forward again. When I went to study writing in Seattle at the University of Washington, I was very fortunate to have a teaching fellowship, but turns out the cost of living in Seattle was a little more than I was expecting, and I needed to pick up some extra work. And I came across a job listing for a hagwon, which I didn't know what a hagwon was at that point. It wasn't, the word wasn't in the listing, but hagwon is a Korean study school, and they needed an English teacher, and I was an English graduate student trying to make some extra money, and that is how I came to know Mrs. Kim, who hired me to teach English and SAT prep, and I wound up doing all kinds of things, but that's basically what she hired me to do. And that was really such an interesting experience in so many ways. First of all, because it's the first time in my life that people assumed that I spoke Korean the second they looked at me, and also the first time that people weren't sure that I could speak English well enough to teach it, but who were Korean themselves. It was like my whole world was turned upside down in a really kind of interesting way. I ate Korean food with Korean people every day for the first time in my life. And Mrs. Kim kind of, as those of you who know her will recognize this, she sort of appointed herself as my Korean tutor. And so we started these one-on-one Korean lessons, the two of us, where she would we would sort of work on phrases and pronunciation. At that point, when I first met Mrs. Kim, I knew Hangul. I knew the alphabet. I could sound things out and spell them for the most part, but I really had very little vocabulary. And so, she really sort of helped open this new world to me, and give me a Korean community that I had never really had before. So that is kind of that's the short version of my life, and just to give you maybe a little sense of where I'm coming from in this conversation, and I look forward to hearing from everyone else and to talking to some of you in a little bit.